Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Vlogs of History. As always, I'm your host, Darius Kazan, and today we have part 2 in our two-part series covering the French Revolution and the Napoleonic era. If you missed part 1, make sure to check it out right here because it does have some background information that would be very useful in understanding this video. And also be sure to subscribe because these episodes come out every single Monday with a brand new subject every single week. With that being said, let's get started on part 2 covering Napoleon. Napoleon Bonaparte was a famous army general that was a significant figure in France towards the end of the French Revolution. Where we left off in part 1, we saw that France was making military progress in every single direction towards the end of the French Revolution. This was of course due to a new and young general leading his army successfully into battle. That young general was, well, Napoleon Bonaparte. Born in 1769 in Corsica, a territory acquired by the French from the Italians, Napoleon was born to nobility. Although his family's noble status, the family wasn't actually very wealthy. They were quite poor. As a boy, he attended military school in mainland France where he learned French and eventually graduated from the French Military Academy in 1785. During the early years of the French Revolution, Napoleon wasn't actually in France, he was on his mainland island. He was on military leave where he became associated with the Jacobins. After conflicts with the island's ruler, the Bonaparte family was forced to move back to France where Napoleon resumed his military duties. He became associated with Augustin Robespierre, brother of the famous Maximilien Robespierre, who was the one who put all the people on the guillotine. In part 1, we took a look at how the guillotine was used during the French Revolution, and we said that 15,000 people were put on the guillotine. Well, that was Maximilien Robespierre, who was also a Jacobin himself. And so Napoleon became associated with those Jacobins and with Maximilien Robespierre. At that point in time, Napoleon was a second lieutenant in the French army. In 1796, he commanded an army that defeated the larger armies of Austria, one of the country's main rivals. Because of this victory, the leading powers in France offered Napoleon a chance to lead an army on the invasion of England. Napoleon proposed not to use France's naval forces against the British because the British obviously had an advantage, instead to hit them in Egypt to disrupt their trade routes. He won the battle in Egypt, but British naval forces eventually came and took down Napoleon's naval forces. This caused Napoleon's army to be stranded in Egypt. Now at the same time, there's very much political uncertainty in France. Because of the French Revolution, everything was unstable. That summer, Napoleon abandoned his army in Egypt and returned back to mainland France. In 1799, Napoleon managed to overthrow the French Directory, a group of 5 men who would rule France from 1795. He replaced the French Directory with the 3-person consul, where he would be the first consul, making him the leading political figure for France at the time. His victories in battle, especially with Austria, helped cement his position as first consul. Napoleon worked to restore stability to post-revolutionary France. He centralized the government, instituted reforms in the areas of banking and education, and was for the science and the arts. All very good things for France at the time. He then made an amendment to the constitution, effectively making him first consul for life. 2 years later, he crowned himself the Emperor of France in the Notre Dame Cathedral. This was the start of the Napoleonic Wars, a series of battles led and won by Napoleon himself. The Napoleonic Wars consisted of wars against the Russians, the Austrians, the British, and the Ottoman Empire. For the majority of wars, Napoleon was successful in winning battles. After years of successful battles, in 1812, Napoleon's armies targeted Russia and started invading Russian territories. The Russians, though, had a different strategy on how to combat Napoleon and his armies. Instead of facing them head-on, they actually retreated every single time Napoleon's armies would make progress into Russian territory. This was to lure the Napoleon armies deeper and deeper into Russian territory. When Napoleon got to Moscow, he saw that the whole city was evacuated. That's when the Russians started to burn the surrounding areas in an attempt to cut off supplies getting to Napoleon's armies. With the impending winter, Napoleon and his armies were forced to retreat from Russia. On their way back, the Russians started attacking Napoleon's armies. Napoleon and his army were so unprepared that out of the 600,000 people that came into Russia, only 100,000 made it out. At the same time, in Spain and Portugal, Napoleon's armies were losing battles because of a new alliance between Spain, Portugal, and Britain. Also, a new coalition between Austria, Russia, Prussia, and Sweden managed to beat Napoleon's armies in very different areas. The Napoleon army was losing battles and territories, and eventually the new coalition made its way into France. Upon reaching France, the new coalition exiled Napoleon from power. The new coalition brought back a king, King Louis XVIII, effectively removing all the progress they made during the French Revolution. Napoleon, during his exile, of course he wanted his power back, and where he was exiled, he managed to get a few supporters and eventually made his way back to Paris. Upon arriving to France, Napoleon was greeted with cheering crowds. He rallied up enough supporters that the king at the time, he fled because he was afraid that Napoleon was taken over again. That was the start of Napoleon's 100 days campaign for power. Napoleon assembled a new army and planned to attack the coalition one by one before they could orchestrate a unified attack. Even though he won some battles, the coalition was actually stronger and they still won the big war, and they forced him to exile once again on a remote British island where he died at the age of 51. And that concludes our two-part series on the French Revolution, Napoleon, and the Napoleonic era. I really hope you enjoyed these two-part series. I'm going to make more, and if you did, be sure to leave a like, share it to a friend, and subscribe to be notified when the next episode comes out, which is next Monday. Also, be sure to not miss the Vlogs of History After Hours episodes that come out every single Wednesday. These episodes are an extension to the Vlogs of History show, where we take essentially a subject from that week's Vlogs of History episode, go into more detail, and explore it in further depth. If you've missed the previous Vlogs of History episodes, you can check them out right here, and make sure to subscribe to catch the new ones. As always, I'm your host, Darius Gazin. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I will see you all in the next one.